do. So what Kevin and I are going to do is first I'm going to let him introduce himself, but then I'd like to hear a little bit more about AutoGenius and then some of your all's passions for the industry, because I think there's a lot more behind the story than just the title of this session, which, by the way, I want to repeat the title because I think it's really awesome. It is Milliseconds Make Millions, Why Website Speed Makes Sense. And so we're gonna come back to that because I know you're gonna share with me what that means, and more specifically what it means for a variety of audiences. And I'm first though would like to have you introduce yourself to the audience.
How much time do we have now? I'm Kevin. Hey. I think a lot of my perspective comes from, I started coding when I was 7 years old. And
what was that you started?
Coding.
Okay.
When I was 7. Mainly because there were no games on the Mac. So my parents were teachers. You know, who knows this? Remember this? So my parents were teachers. We'd have early access to a Mac at home. And then we realized that there was like 2 games. And so my older brother and I would start picking apart those games and realizing we can like replace the sprites in them. We can like change the characters and change the sound effects and started making. Yeah, so there's this thing called AppleScript back then. Anyway, so we made a Star Wars game out of like something that was not Star Wars. And then I realized like this is actually pretty fun. And then, so been doing web design all through, like I did it through grade school, did a bunch of the school sites. And then I ran a couple agencies, and then I got into tech in Toronto for about 10 years. And, I guess like just, you know, my role here at, I guess with AutoGenius is I bring a perspective of how to build things at scale, because I worked in telecom for 10 years, and how do you work with like hundreds of millions of records, of like consumer records and billions of data points, and I just had this context to learn. So I'm like, I have to use it somewhere. But I also, I think there's this empathy part that I bring. We can talk about like, you know, some of my, like what living with autism is and ADHD is like, but it's given me a lot of, I think just a passion for how do you fix things? How do you like, get really deep into how people, you know, are motivated, and then how do you build solutions to make their lives better? So I just like love that. It's like a long. You'll find also it takes me a while to say a simple idea, but hopefully that gives you a little bit.
Absolutely, and I love how you boil it down to so much about the speed, and let's just talk a little bit about AutoGenius, how it came to be, and why you guys. Because the other thing that I thought was great, and Paul, I felt like I caught a big fish that same day because he goes, "And what about that Shark Tank? We want to be involved in that too." And I was like, "Awesome. This is great. Honey, I'm going to be a few minutes," right? So I got a good sales call going on here. Why AutoGenius? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah. So my previous company, we would help with like retail reps in telecom. And these are like dealers, just for context. I don't know if you ever seen, how many have gone to like a Verizon store or AT&T store or T-Mobile store? Ever go into one of those stores? Yeah. What you might not know is like 99% of them are actually dealers. It looks like a corporate store, but those are actually independent dealers that can recognize you and can look up your stuff and like, you know, I wouldn't say they're the best at customer service, but there are some elements of it that are like feel connected. So yeah, I had that experience, and then, but I kind of just got to a point where I wasn't excited about selling more iPhones. It was just kind of like, you know, great, we sold, you know, we increased conversions of more iPhones, and it just wasn't as satisfying. And then when I looked at auto, I just saw, I saw that there was a bunch of gaps in it, people trying to solve it in different ways, but without the infrastructure that telecom has. And it took, I think when the catalyst for coming into auto was my younger brother. So just for some context, I changed out of my other job because I had just gotten diagnosed with ADHD in 2018. And that was like a shock for me. I mean, everyone around me was like, yeah, like, duh. Like,
Full self-awareness.
it's like, frick, no, why didn't you say anything earlier? But it's hard to get diagnosed as an adult because it often gets diagnosed as like depression or something else. And then, so for me, that was like a catalyst to go, I want to like, self-analyze what's actually going to motivate me. And I want to help people who are in my situation who are often frustrated with technology and with especially website experiences. And then as a test, I had my younger brother who also is on the spectrum, who lives with me. He's 27. And what we did, it was an experiment. I said, you know what, I'm just like interested in this auto industry. I see this mess. I'll just call it complete chaos of like how dealer websites are. And I don't think it's anyone's fault, but I just, saw there's a problem. But I had him do this exercise where he would shop for a car. And as part of him living with me, it's like introducing him to kind of key things in life that you kind of have to get through, like buying a car, how do you get your first credit card, and because with the spectrum, like things that are easy for a lot of people are like really difficult. Like I can be a genius on some of this stuff, but I'm like horrible at a lot of other things, like remembering to like eat, I don't know, like just like basic stuff. But for him, I wanted to see what his experience was like, and I had a camera watch him go through the process of buying a car. And it brought me to tears, actually. No joke. And again, also, I think from a perspective standpoint, autism can often, it creates like an extreme empathy. Like, I don't know, those that know me or who've like interacted with me sometimes, I can be a little intense. And like someone's like, oh, I want to put another button on the VDP. And I'm like, no!
I react the same way.
But it's actually like painful to me.
Yes.
It's painful. And the funny thing is I'm not the one experiencing it, but I'm like in pain on behalf of the other person more than I should be. Anyway, I'm watching my younger brother going through the sites and there's this camera on his face and he's just, you could see the frustration of him like trying to find where to click. Right? Or like just navigate it. And he gave up at one point. And he's like, I just can't, you know what? I don't even want a driver's license. And no joke, he just actually stopped getting his driver's license renewal.
Wow.
True story. And I've only recently got him to be more comfortable with maybe try it again, right? But he gave up because of this, like looking at this experience going, this is just chaos, I can't deal with this. And so that was the motivation for wanting to really jump into auto, because I'm like, that's wrong. Like people should be able to move through the world. And the car is the way to do that often. And so we need to make it so people can do that. And so, and then as I wanted to get into this industry, I met Kyle and Ben through LinkedIn during the pandemic. And because Toronto was in shutdown. And it was like 18 months of like lockdown basically, and I was going nuts. And so I started reaching out to just people online. And
you picked two good ones to reach out to.
I picked two good ones, and I was looking at who like talks about this stuff in auto, and then we just kind of hit it off. And it's the first time I built a business where it's people that I didn't know previously or not like in my city. Because I'm in Toronto, Kyle's in Nashville, and Ben's in Vermont. And so it's just like, it doesn't make sense, right? But we hit it off. And so going back to, your question was, how do we get into auto? So that's how I got back into this. It is like a passion thing for, wanting to solve this problem and solve it all the way. That's the thing. So if I'm going to do something, this is like, I want to actually like go all the way with it. Like don't just do the surface. Solve the entire problem. And so Auto Genius was this idea of let's build a community of really kind of cool marketers that often feel alone, right? I don't know if you've ever maybe felt this way. Maybe you don't want to admit it, but it can be lonely in the marketing role if you have a small team. Like when I look at auto, the size of the businesses, like someone who has 5 stores should have a marketing department that is a certain size. Like there's a certain way this is supposed to be. And there are companies with 100 stores or 50 stores that have, these really tiny marketing departments with under 10 people sometimes. And it can be lonely, right, to kind of bounce ideas off. So the thought was we start a Slack community, we get a bunch of people together, and I was like super excited to jump into this because I'm like, we're going to create this community, and again, I'm in lockdown, I'm going to have this community I can like talk to, and we're going to do all these experiments. It's going to be great. Because in telecom, you do 1,000 experiments a day sometimes. Or like you're doing multiple true A/B testing during the same time period, turning something on and off to different groups or different locations. I thought, great, we're going to just do this. And then I don't know if some of the originals were here. I think Joe was one of them.
Joe Brown.
Joe Brown.
Yeah. Joe, you out there?
Are you out there? Maybe he's gone. He was.
Yeah, he was.
Gray, you were one of the originals.
Yeah.
You remember, like people were just like, what the hell are you talking about? And that's when for me, I realized, we can't just build the community because now I'm just like whetting their appetite for how this is supposed to be. And we're like, we have to build some tech. And that's where Koons.com came, where people were basically saying it's not possible in auto to do the cool stuff. And like, oh yeah? Let's try this. So that's like the genesis for how we got into being a tech company, because it wasn't the original idea.
It was really just intended to kind of shape community and like-minded people.
Well, I mean, to your point about like asking about this audience, like how do we build value? I think the idea, what excited me about the community is this is a way for us to actually get to know everyone and what they care about. And that's what matters first. Like if you just jump to the product, you can create the wrong product. And so I think it's important to have the right perspective. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so along those lines, let's talk about the importance of speed, because in 2000, I was very lucky I got to be involved in a company called Ford Direct. And even back then, 24 years ago, Northwest Airlines had the fastest website. And you could go online to some very, I would imagine it probably loaded pretty slow, and it would rate websites on load speed. Mm-hmm. I'm just a car guy, and I just always remembered the first one to the customer typically got the sell. Statistics we've read say 78% of people buy from the first salesperson that engages with them. So it stands to reason, I thought, well, if we can be the fastest website in automotive, this will be great. So when I heard you and Ben talk about that and Kyle, I was like, oh my God, where have you been the last 24 years? This would have been magic back then. But why does it matter even more now? And when you look at not just the consumer from a transactional standpoint, but just from an ease of use and confidence and other elements that sometimes, and I've heard people talk about, websites, and you got to build your website for, people who can't see, people who can't use their hands, people, and a lot of people go, well, they don't buy cars, and it's so callous. But the fact of the matter is, we're just one step away from being in the same situation.
Well, on that, like one of the first chats, even at Koons, was like, oh, wait, do autistic people buy cars? I'm like, well, guess who runs the businesses? So it takes a certain level of person to kind of obsess over things. And so there's a lot of undiagnosed folks too, who just kind of get frustrated with things and not understand why. But going back to your thinking on that is that so I guess from like what caused Koons to come about, I just worked with some telecom clients before, and I'd done this experiment. Let's just make a fast site. And I think this is why this has not been solved before.
And may I interject just a moment? Koons Automotive Group has been acclaimed in the digital world for the last 25 years. You all might have read a headline recently that he sold the group for over $1 billion. little penny, and that was the first guy that I ever knew personally who was really just 100% all in on digital all those years ago. And Jim was just really dynamic. So Koons Automotive Group, primarily based in Northern Virginia and other stores in that general climate. I just wanted to give them that orientation.
Yeah, I fell in love with them because for me, again, I'm coming from Canada and I didn't really know what life was like in the dealer world. So before we even started with Koons, it actually came from a conversation in our community where basically I was chatting about certain stuff, and then I get this ping from Jake Barron, who was at the time marketing director there, and he said, "Hey, let's talk about data." And I said, "You know what? I'll fly out to see you." Again, we have no contract, right? There's no we didn't have anything to sell. We were not a tech company at this point. I just spent some time there, and I was retired from my previous job. And so I was like, okay, I spent a week at Koons and became basically one of the employees. And they kind of adopted me. And it was really fascinating because I would start looking at some of the reports and they thought they had a data problem. And then I realized we're not measuring the right things. Everything that was on the table was what happens after the lead comes through. But what about all the stuff happening before? So I think one of the reasons why this is important now is advertising budgets change to digital. And so now you have this flood of traffic coming from, it's not hard to get traffic, right? You can get the clicks, right? But because now you've got the clicks, you've got the audience, if the site takes 30 seconds to load, and in their case, the existing site was 34 seconds to load on mobile. And if you look at a typical site, not on your Wi-Fi, not plugged into your home internet, but on your phone in the real world, it takes a while for these things to load. And so when we did this test, it was over 30 seconds. People's attention span is 3 seconds, maybe 4. And it just so happens that people want a car so much that they're willing to spend a little bit more, but that's a problem. So there was a lot of waste, actually. And so anyway, the thesis was, can we make something faster? And we didn't even know if it would work. I did it in other industries. I saw a 6x increase in leads within 3 days of launch, instantly. And then I saw that site in telecom rank in 150 keywords within 3 weeks. Wow. Purely because of the speed. The content was exactly the same. And I was so I knew that there was something, right? So Google cared about it. And we knew that it worked, it helped with conversion. Didn't know if it would work in auto. And we took, it was a huge risk for them and for us, right? And it was very pricey to do it. But I think what was surprising is just once we were able to test that the tech worked, but before we even priced it out or any of that, we had to test, did the tech actually work? Once we knew it worked, then we delivered that within 3 months. And I don't know if I'd recommend that. That was a little nuts. But it was just a really good exercise though, because it actually hit all levels of the company. COO was involved, VP of sales, marketing, inventory, it went all across the org. And I think what I'm realizing now is Koons was kind of special in that I don't know how many times you get that type of cross-functional engagement right away. So it was a cool experience.
So how does speed affect user behavior and decision making? Yeah,
so here's just some quick stats. We saw within the first few days of launch, this was right after NADA 2022, we saw a 6x increase in conversions. And it eventually ended up going to 20x increase. It was just nuts. Not to say that's always going to be the case, but it was substantially more. I thought we would double leads, and it just had a huge effect. So the speed alone, because it's the same inventory, right? It's the same inventory, it's the same data. We had to clean some of it, but essentially it's the same product, right? And the site itself actually has less content. We eliminated over 4,000 pages of content. that were like, blog posts and all these different things. We just eliminated them and made it so the actual VDPs rank.
Yeah.
And so you'll find now, like if you were to search certain like patterns, certain VDPs will outrank third parties. It'll be like above Carfax, it'll be above the manufacturer sometimes in that local area, which that was the thesis. We didn't even know if it would work, but yeah, I'd say like, so speed had a huge impact. It affected conversion. It affected the pages per visit. So like the thesis originally was, we saw that most people who became leads went to 4 or more pages. So the entire project's job was get people to go to 4 or more pages, with those pages being VDPs. And if we could do that, then we'll probably get more leads. But we didn't even know, right, if the leads would actually happen. And so we just laser focused on that. And what it shows is speed allows people to keep going, right? Or actually, I'll put it differently. I think what it was speed gets them through the door. Like the traffic sends people to the door. Speed gets them to go through the door. UI gets them to stay a while. So yeah, like speed alone can't just do everything. You can get some lift though from it. But I think in their case, it was like all those things, which is why the results were so high. But the problem with that, it was intense, right? It cost over $1 million to make. And it was just nuts, like maxed out credit cards. It was like, because we didn't want to charge them that, right? And it was kind of crazy. But we learned at least what's possible when you do all those different things, right?
You proved the model.
Yeah, like what happens if you just make it faster? What happens if you make it faster with some better UI, et cetera? Right.
So in that iterative process, I want to share something with you. Years ago, I happened across a book called Don't Make Me Think.
Yes, I love that book.
It's my favorite
It's
when
great.
it comes to website design. And they've got now different versions of it, and Steve Krug is the author. And when you were saying grimacing, oh, don't put that button on there, that's the whole premise of it is, if you can build the speed and you can reduce the thinking,
Yes.
everything tends to be more magical on the website.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was definitely not what I expected. I'll say that
I need
much.
the I need the capital one VDP conversion thing. I also need the other thing for whatever. So you got a lot of people that are sitting here coming to you and saying,
Right.
oh, but you got to have this, you got to have that.
And we for those that interacted with me in the beginning too, I think maybe the first interactions I scared people because I was the guy that just said no all the time.
Yeah.
And even with Koons, the intention was never to redesign the site. We didn't really, no one asked us to do that, I guess, right? There was no spec that said, please redesign the site. But what I said at the time was, just maybe I'm wrong, but let me prove it first. If I'm wrong, then, we'll do it your way, right? But let's try something. And the idea was just get it to a baseline. Like, what happens if you have one button? Turns out, actually, instead of having people getting really confused with too many options, more people convert because there's less choice. And you can even get them to drill down to where they want to go, but don't give them all those choices at once. It's too much information. Anyway.
Yeah, so
it was an interesting process for sure.
So obviously, you mentioned the cost of deployment. What have you all done with other projects, and where are you with other projects with other clients and such?
Yeah, so like what's happened since? So Koons validated some really great stuff for us. It was like a concept car, right? Like what happens if you go fast and it looks good and it's sleek, and it didn't have personalization built in. It was just fast, right? So, but we also learned, man, this is really expensive, right? And if we did another few jobs like that, we would have gone bankrupt. for sure. If I just did one more site like that, but it's like you hit a limit of how much risk you can take. So we realized we had to do it. We had to do this more efficiently. So we rewrote the whole code base again and started launching later that year. We call it Gen 2, and we did a few sites we did one site with that to make it so we did multi-language. We had a mortgage client that wanted the same technology but used multi-language. So we had to train it for that. Then we realized, oh, this is really chaotic. We rewrote the code base again. And that's Gen 3. And we have launched or are launching about a dozen or so groups on that right now. But then still, we looked at that and we were like, this is too expensive. Like, again, for those who've maybe chatted with us, we say no. I guess what I was saying before about why I wasn't making friends earlier. We say no a lot of the time, right? Like most people probably don't want to work with us because we're opinionated. And we might have better results on certain things, but like some people are used to, I want more buttons, I want these other things. And we're the ones who are like, let's test it. Maybe the answer is no. So there's a limit of how many dealers are willing to invest, right, to that level where they have a few months, they are willing to spend more than $1,000 on a site per month. And so again, that limits our ability to impact the industry. So that's what brought us to this thesis about a year ago was, I wonder if we can just actually fix existing sites. And we had this idea a couple of years ago, just the tech didn't exist yet, but we've cracked a way to basically stream new experiences into existing sites. So that's our Gen 4 stuff. And we launched a public company on the tech recently and have been stress testing it. And now we've got about a half dozen groups that are going to be on our Gen 4 stuff. But it actually, not only can it be a group site, but we can inject it into existing sites. And so meaning like we can make things faster, or you can actually eventually make it faster and look a little bit better. So this is a huge change for us because we were historically only someone who would have to do the full stack. And this is, it was a big bet to say, okay, can we actually do it? But we've been running some true A/B tests with it the last few months. We ran a bunch of betas with the Auto Genius group. We had about 300 something dealers put their hand up and say, fix our sites, or test fixing our site speed. And that was within 3 days of us like saying, hey, we think we can do this. And we're like, okay, shoot. We have to stop taking more names. But we ran the last 2.5, or I guess now it's been 3.5 months. We've been running some A/B tests, and we're now super confident that we're seeing just speed improvement, not changing anything about the UI. We're seeing conversion increases of 20 to 30%. And that's with existing sites, with existing child sites.
Wow. And
yeah.
I thought it was pretty telling when Ben was presenting, you were there, and he was going through site speed, and he took some of the poor members of our marketing 20 group and tested their sites, and some of them are still not loaded.
No.
I mean, it was just remarkably slow and painful from the user standpoint. I'm so impatient when it comes to website. I'm immediately refresh.
Yeah.
So that's a big breakthrough. So I would just be curious at this point, where do we go from here? What does the future look like? And because you mentioned scalability, cost of scaling, because everybody in here is sitting there going, if I can get a 6X, if I can improve conversion, raise my hand, I don't have to switch website providers, I can stay with the one the OEM makes me use or whatever. What does the future look like for your all's product set?
So right now it's people can just install a script tag, and they just the major vendors, they're already aware of us. Like as part of this beta group, we have, I think all of the major vendors are part of it. And a few of them have partnered with us to put it in the right place. So we actually are able to be like one of the first things, or if not the first thing that fires on the page, which lets us fix things, change the order of how stuff loads enough that we don't break anything, that's the tough part. So if I think of what's our future right now is we're now going from the dozens that we've been testing to the hundreds that are in the wait list, to then the thousands that will follow. And along the way, we're going to be adding people to the team to specialize on each web vendor, and then potentially different plugins to really make sure that we're loading them properly. But this is our baby. We've got about 20 full-time people now on this, and so now we're scaling that up. And so I think from like where the product is right now, people put a script tag on their existing site. Right now it's a free beta, and then once we know that it works, then we say, hey, it's working. Let's have a conversation about a license, and it's much less than what it would have been for us to do a whole new site. And then once we do that, there's a whole bunch of optimizations we want to do further, like experimentation, running A/B tests. Because I think one of the things I've heard from some marketers here that I've spoken to in the past, it's really hard to know if that button, that Cap 1 button, actually works. And even though I think one thing that we want to do that's different, I think, with the child sites than what we've done with the Coons.coms, is we're going to have to be less opinionated on some of this stuff, right? As much as I would love to say no, we're not going to do that. We're going to let all of the experiments run, but just treat them as that. They're experiments. So if someone wants to put a button or 5 buttons, okay, let's test it. Let 20% of your traffic or a certain amount of traffic, we'll see that, and then there's a control group over the same time period, and that will inform what is better, right? And maybe in some markets, 2 buttons is better than 1. I don't know, right? But we'll find out. And so that's basically where the product's going, and then I think from there we'll kind of discover what the next 5 or 6 plugins or things that we'll do.
So I try to think of a Canadian approach to this. I mean, it just seems so out of character that you would just say no. So have you iterated to sorry, no?
I don't apologize for anything, actually, no. I think because I grew up in Windsor, so it's South Detroit.
Oh.
So we had Doppler 4000 weather. I think in Fahrenheit. I have to translate to Celsius. So maybe I get the Michigan part. So no, the answer is no. But it's more no, but let's try something. Sure. Is probably now the new thing. Because before the answer was no, and now it's no, but let's try an experiment.
Yeah.
We're not actually, no, it won't even be no. It will be let's try it. That's actually the replacement for just saying no.
So everybody's on board with that, Colin, Ben, Earl, because I can see the 3 of y'all getting pretty headstrong.
Well, I'd say, what are you talking about? Yeah, no. Okay, when it's group sites, it's a little bit different.
Sure.
Group sites, we're going to be super opinionated, and we're probably right, just so for those who want to ask. and only because we're just obsessive about experimenting. And even though we're right today, we could be wrong tomorrow.
Of course.
And so we just, as long as we stay humble about that and just make sure that we stay right, which means that we have to keep trying stuff, keep failing, keep iterating on things, then we'll keep adding value there. But yeah, it always comes from some place of there's some statistic behind it, there's some reasoning behind it, there's some science, some psychology, some study. Something is usually behind when we say, maybe that's not the best idea to have 6 buttons.
Sure.
It's a cool dynamic for sure, because I think for me, it's I'm just obsessive about the consumer experience and about performance.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's I should just see here, there's a picture that was kind of cool. Yeah, so this just kind of, for those that haven't heard heard some of the stuff, this is, I guess it's probably easier for me to see here. The first one is what a typical site looks like in automotive. And funny enough, the actual platforms themselves are pretty fast. It's just these widgets and widgets that all get kind of added on top of each other and on top of each other, and they all bring their own little operating system, and they're like, oh, I don't know if this is already on the page, and it might be, it's this 10-year-old tech that I rely on, and they just bring it along with them. And then you get to this point where you have 18 Google Tag Managers on the page. But that's not the web vendor that did that. That's just like people not really realizing the effect of speed. And I don't think it's anyone's fault. But that's like, but if you look at this experience, this is what a consumer experience is. And by like that first like line there, like with that first little like line you kind of see, that's where people would just leave. So if you're having all this advertising dollars going to a page that takes that long to load, you're just throwing money away, right? And that's usually where people have like found the budget. But
That's where the milliseconds to millions.
yes.
So it's the advantage of the growth in revenue, and it's the reduction in spend potentially that you might need once people.
Yeah, like with Coons, they went from a 18-second load time to go from SRP to VDP to 200 milliseconds. And from
That's pretty fast.
it's a little fast, but our new stuff's faster. So you can see that now, the Gen 4. The Gen 4 is actually 50 times faster than Coons.com.
So
It's pretty nuts.
So we're at wrap up. You guys are out there at the booth. Is this something that members of the audience can get involved with?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's this free beta. So if you're not, you have to be a member of the community. So which for those that are here, it's free. And so if you're not part of it already, you can join it. It's a Slack group. You can kind of talk to your peers, share best practices. There's people who are sharing spreadsheets and stuff like that. And then once you're a member, you can sign up to the beta program, the beta list. And we're just working through in order of the people that have like it's first come, first serve, if that makes sense. So there's already a waiting list, but people can join the waiting list. And we'll just start opening up when people can start using it. And I think if there's something that people can do right now is they could install the script and let us prove it, right? And if it doesn't work, then that's it. There's no like, we don't want to take people's like money and then not deliver. So we'd rather make sure it works first.
How about that, guys? If y'all would, please give a warm thank you. I appreciate any innovator that wants to improve things that all of us can grasp and go after. So, and thank you so much for being part of this group.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll see you back later when we do the Shark Tank.
Yeah.
One more time, please.
Thanks.